In the novel Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed, Natasha moves with Haja Fatima to her other relative's house due to a combination of family conflict, stigma, and the need for shelter and support. Here's a summary of the situation and reasons. Stigma and rejection. After Natasha's status as an illegitimate child is discovered by her relatives, her uncle becomes furious and demands that she leave his house immediately. His wife is also shocked and frightened, viewing Natasha as an outcast and a source of shame who could contaminate her own daughters. The family fears that Natasha's presence will bring disgrace and negative attention to them. Haja Fatima's support. Despite the strong objections of her brother and his wife, Haja Fatima, who is a cousin of Natasha's late grandfather and has been supportive of Natasha, defends her. She threatens self-harm if Natasha is forced to leave, arguing that Natasha is not responsible for her mother's actions. This intervention allows Natasha to stay, but only temporarily and over the objections of the others. Community ostracism. News of Natasha's background spreads quickly through the neighborhood, leading to widespread gossip, curiosity, and further social exclusion. Neighbors come to see her out of curiosity, treating her as a spectacle rather than a person. Natasha is completely ostracized from the possibility of marriage or normal social acceptance. Moved to other relatives. Eventually, due to the ongoing tension and rejection, Haja Fatima decides to move with Natasha to her brother's house, another relative. However, even in the new house, Natasha faces suspicion and is asked to prove her blood relationship. The cycle of stigma and rejection continues, but Haja Fatima remains her main source of support and insists on staying with her. In summary, Natasha moves with Haja Fatima to her other relatives because she is rejected and stigmatized by her current hosts after her illegitimacy is revealed. Haja Fatima, who supports Natasha, chooses to accompany her to ensure she has shelter and some measure of protection, despite the ongoing challenges and social exclusion they both face. Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child. Book 2. Here's a summary of the social reactions to Natasha's situation in the novel Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed. 1. Immediate family reaction. Natasha's relatives, especially her uncle and his wife, react with shock, anger, and rejection when they discover she is an illegitimate child. Her uncle demands she leave the house immediately, and his wife fears Natasha's presence will contaminate her own daughters. Only Haja Fatima defends Natasha, threatening self-harm if Natasha is forced to leave, but this only allows Natasha to stay temporarily and does not resolve the underlying hostility. 2. Community and neighbors. News of Natasha's background spreads rapidly through the neighborhood, leading to widespread gossip and curiosity. Neighbors, especially women, come to the house to see Natasha for themselves, treating her as a spectacle or an alien, not as a person. Despite her beauty, Natasha is considered unmarriageable. No family would allow their son to marry a bastard daughter, regardless of her qualities. Young men in the area become obsessed with seeing her, but only as an object of lust, not as a potential wife. 3. Social ostracism and stigma. Natasha is treated as a subhuman, outcast, and untouchable, believed to spread contagious shame. She is excluded from normal social interactions and completely ostracized from the possibility of marriage or acceptance in the community. The reaction is not just passive avoidance, but active social punishment and dehumanization. 4. Mockery and ridicule. Some neighbors come out of curiosity and to mock or judge Natasha's situation, seeing her as a living embodiment of shame and disgrace. 5. Isolation and exclusion. Natasha is isolated and not welcomed or accepted into the community. Her presence is seen as a threat to the social and moral order. In summary, Natasha faces a harsh and multifaceted social reaction: immediate family rejection, rapid spread of gossip, objectification, dehumanization, and total social exclusion. She is treated as a spectacle and a source of shame, with her presence provoking fear, curiosity, and condemnation. Only a few individuals, like Haja Fatima, show her support, but the overwhelming response is one of stigma and ostracism. Men's attitudes toward Natasha are shaped by deep-seated cultural, religious, and social prejudices surrounding her status as an illegitimate child. Here's an overview of how men in the novel respond to Natasha. 1. Authority and rejection. Male relatives, such as uncles and other family heads, react with anger and rejection when Natasha's background is revealed. They see her as a source of shame and dishonor, and some demand that she be expelled from the household. Men in positions of authority, like police officers, treat Natasha with suspicion, hostility, and, at times, violence, especially when she is unable to prove her identity or is perceived as violating social norms. 2. Objectification and lust. Young men in the neighborhood become obsessed with Natasha's beauty, but not in a respectful or romantic way. Instead, they view her as an object of lust, gathering outside her house in hopes of catching a glimpse of her. Despite their fascination, none would consider marrying her due to the stigma attached to her birth. Natasha is not seen as a potential wife, but as a spectacle or even a target for sexual fantasy, further dehumanizing her and reinforcing her outsider status. 3. Social exclusion and dehumanization. Men in the community reinforce her exclusion by refusing to interact with her as an equal. She is treated as subhuman, outcast, untouchable, and her presence is believed to bring shame or contaminate others. Even when Natasha tries to assert herself or seek justice, men in authority often dismiss her, refuse to believe her, or actively work against her interests. 4. Control and surveillance. Male relatives and community leaders enforce strict control over Natasha's movements, choices, and even her presence in the household. She is subject to surveillance and is not allowed to move freely or make decisions independently. The broader patriarchal system gives men the power to define her worth, restrict her agency, and determine her fate. In summary, men's attitudes toward Natasha in the novel are characterized by rejection, objectification, exclusion, and control. They see her primarily through the lens of social stigma and patriarchal values, which leads to her dehumanization and isolation. Even those who are fascinated by her beauty do not see her as worthy of respect or inclusion, but rather as a source of shame or desire. Natasha discovers that Shama, sometimes spelled Shama, is her half-sister through a combination of family revelations and overheard conversations among her relatives. Here's how Natasha comes to know Shama is her half-sister. Family discussions and revelations. After Natasha moves in with her relatives in Sudan, there is a tense confrontation about her background. During this confrontation, Haja Fatima, her great-grandfather's cousin and a key supporter, and other family members discuss the family's history, including the scandal of Natasha's mother and the identity of Natasha's biological father. Key details revealed. In the course of this argument, it is revealed that Shama is the daughter of Badriya, who was the first wife of Sheikh Yasser Sef al-Dawla, Natasha's biological father. Natasha, on the other hand, is the daughter of Sheikh Yasser Sef al-Dawla and Natasha's mother, who was not married to him. This means that Shama and Natasha share the same father, but have different mothers. Natasha's realization. Natasha is surprised and emotional when she hears this information. She realizes for the first time that Shama, whom she has befriended and lived with as a relative and friend, is actually her half-sister. The revelation is both shocking and poignant for Natasha, as it deepens her understanding of her family ties and the complexities of her identity. Direct evidence from the text. Once again, Natasha has become amazed when she came to know that Shama is her real half-sister. Moreover, she is surprised when she heard that her father's family name is Sef al-Dawla and not Sef al-Din. She wished that Haja Fatima had revealed that information to her from the time she came to stay with them. She began to weep when she remembered her friendship with her sister Shama Yasser Sef al-Dawla. Everyone thought that Natasha is weeping because someone called her a bastard daughter. Ultimately, The threat of Haja Fatima that she would cut one of her breasts and her strong argument have forced her brother to allow Natasha to stay in his house against his wish and the desire of his wife. Natasha learns Shama is her half-sister during a heated family discussion when it is revealed that they share the same father, Sheikh Yasser Sef al-Dawla, but have different mothers. This discovery is both a shock and a source of emotional pain and connection for Natasha. Shama decides to marry the polygamist husband, who is already married to her 3 best friends, the 3 rival wives, for several intertwined reasons. 1. Social and economic security. Shama is a widow living with her mother-in-law, Haja Fatima, and facing financial hardship after her husband's death. The polygamist husband is described as quite wealthy and offers to buy Haja Fatima's house, promising to let her stay there as his new mother-in-law. This arrangement is seen as a way to secure both Shama's and Haja Fatima's future. 2. Cultural and religious norms. In the society depicted in the novel, polygamy is normalized and even seen as desirable by some women. Shama herself jokes with Natasha, singing a Sudanese song that means the husband of a married wife is so sweet for her girlfriends, reflecting the cultural acceptance and sometimes even preference for marrying a man who already has wives. 3. Pressure and secrecy. The marriage is arranged in secrecy because Shama and Haja Fatima fear the reaction of the 3 rival wives, who are Shama's friends and neighbors. They worry that the wives might retaliate violently if they discover Shama is marrying their husband. The secrecy and the involvement of family elders in arranging the marriage show the complex social dynamics at play. 4. Hope for improved status. For Shama, marrying a wealthy man, even as a 4th wife, offers a chance to improve her social and economic status, especially after being widowed and childless. The polygamist's promise to provide a home and stability is a strong incentive. 5. Influence of family and community. The decision is not made in isolation. Haja Fatima and Shama are both involved in the negotiations, and the arrangement is seen as beneficial for the family as a whole, not just for Shama individually. In summary, Shama decides to marry the polygamist husband of her 3 best friends due to a mix of economic need, cultural acceptance of polygamy, family pressure, and the hope for greater security and status. The arrangement is made in secrecy to avoid conflict with the other wives, highlighting the complexities and risks women face in such social structure. To the polygamist husband, who is already married to her 3 best friends, on her friendships, based on the content of Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed. 1. Betrayal and loss of trust. Shama's decision to secretly marry the polygamist, who is the husband of her 3 close friends and neighbors, represents a profound breach of trust. The secrecy is necessary because both Shama and Haja Fatima fear that the 3 wives, her friends, would react with violence or severe hostility if they discovered the plan. When the marriage is eventually revealed, the 3 wives feel deeply betrayed by someone they considered a friend and confidant. The sense of betrayal is heightened because Shama was not just a neighbor, but a daily presence in their lives, sharing in their struggles and rivalries. 2. Social and physical consequences. The fallout is immediate and severe. After the marriage is discovered, the 3 rival wives defied the authority of their commonly shared husband and mercilessly hammered the shit out of her and left her half dead. Shama is physically attacked and hospitalized as a direct result of her friend's outrage. Site turns 7fetch_file. This violent reaction underscores how, in a polygamous and patriarchal society, women's solidarity is often undermined by competition for male attention and resources, but there are still strong expectations of loyalty among co-wives and friends. 3. Erosion of female solidarity. The incident demonstrates how polygamy can erode potential solidarity among women. Instead of uniting against the system that oppresses them, the wives turn on Shama for violating the unspoken rules of their friendship and shared suffering. The rivalry and jealousy that already exist among the wives are intensified by Shama's entry as a new wife, leading to further emotional and physical harm. 4. Social isolation. After the attack, Shama becomes an unwanted rival wife in the household. Her friendships with the other wives are irreparably damaged, and she is forced to live in a hostile environment where she is no longer trusted or welcomed. The move from friend to rival is complete, and Shama's social world shrinks as she loses the support and companionship of her former friends. 5. Reflection on women's agency. The episode highlights the limited agency women have in such a society. Shama's choice is shaped by economic need and social pressure, but the consequences are borne almost entirely by her, through violence and isolation. The other wives, rather than blaming the husband or the system, direct their anger at Shama, reinforcing the cycle of competition and suffering. In summary, Shama's marriage to the polygamist husband devastates her friendships with the 3 rival wives. What was once a relationship of neighborly support and shared struggle is shattered by feelings of betrayal, resulting in violence, loss of trust, and social isolation for Shama. The incident powerfully illustrates how polygamy and patriarchal norms can destroy female solidarity and leave women even more vulnerable. Illustrate the fallout in Shama's friendships after she marries the polygamist husband of her 3 best friends. As soon as her former mother-in-law and friend Natasha left, the 3 rival wives defied the authority of their commonly shared husband and mercilessly hammered the shit out of her and left her half dead. After that brutal beating, she was rushed to the hospital by her new man. Of course, the angry husband had beaten his 3 wives for defying his authority by attacking his new lawful 4th wife. After she got discharged from the hospital, Shama went back to those angry wives and lived between them as a new unwanted rival wife. Site turn 7 fetch_file. This passage shows the violent reaction of the 3 wives, who physically attack Shama after discovering her secret marriage to their husband. The complete breakdown of friendship and trust, as Shama is no longer seen as a friend, but as a rival and intruder. Shama's resulting isolation and hostile environment, as she is forced to live among her former friends who now see her as an unwanted rival. The husband plays a pivotal, though indirect, role in the breakdown of Shama's friendships after she marries him as his 4th wife. 1. Initiator and beneficiary. The polygamist husband is the one who proposes marriage to Shama, despite already being married to her 3 friends. He orchestrates the arrangement in secrecy, promising Shama and her family economic security and a place to live, which is a strong incentive for Shama and her mother-in-law. 2. Source of rivalry and jealousy. By marrying Shama, the husband intensifies the existing rivalry among his wives. His decision to add a new wife, especially one who was a close friend to the others, directly triggers feelings of betrayal, jealousy, and anger among the 3 original wives. 3. Enforcer of patriarchal authority. When the 3 wives physically attack Shama after discovering the marriage, the husband responds by beating his 3 original wives for defying his authority by attacking his new lawful 4th wife. This response reinforces his role as the patriarchal enforcer, prioritizing his control over the household rather than addressing the emotional fallout or the broken friendships. 4. Catalyst for social isolation. The husband's actions result in Shama becoming an unwanted rival wife, isolated from her former friends and forced to live in a hostile environment. The breakdown of friendship is a direct consequence of his decision to marry within the same social circle and his lack of concern for the women's relationships with each other. In summary, the husband's decision to marry Shama, his 4th wife, and the friend of his other wives, acts as the catalyst for the collapse of female solidarity and friendship. He benefits from the arrangement, enforces his authority when conflict arises, and ultimately leaves Shama socially isolated, while the other wives feel betrayed and angry. His role highlights the power imbalance and the destructive impact of polygamy on women's relationships in the novel Site Turn. After marrying Shama as his 4th wife, the polygamist husband deceives Haja Fatima, Shama's mother-in-law and main supporter, in the following ways. 1. False promises about the house. The polygamist husband promises to buy Haja Fatima's house and allow her to continue living there as his new mother-in-law. This arrangement is presented as a way to secure Haja Fatima's future and provide stability for both her and Shama. However, after the marriage and the sale of the house, it is revealed that the house is still legally under the name of Haja Fatima's late husband. According to Sharia inheritance law, the property must be divided among the late husband's heirs, his brother and sister, not just Haja Fatima. 2. Manipulating the sale and inheritance. The polygamist husband takes advantage of Haja Fatima's lack of legal knowledge. He orchestrates the sale so that Haja Fatima only receives a quarter of the house's value, while the remaining 3/4 go to her late husband's brother and sister, as dictated by Sharia law. Haja Fatima is left with much less than she expected, and the polygamist husband reneges on his promise to let her stay in the house. He asks her to leave so he can convert the 2 houses into one large mansion for himself and his 4 wives. 3. Breaking family trust. After securing the house and marrying Shama, the polygamist husband abandons his promises to both women. Haja Fatima is forced to move out and rely on other relatives for shelter, while Shama is left to face hostility from the other wives. Direct evidence from the novel. As a matter of fact, her house is still under the name of her late husband who died many years ago due to cancer. Because of the house under the name of her late husband, his brother and sister claimed their shares on the inheritance of their deceased brother. The wicked polygamist knew about this matter and hid it from the 2 widows until he married Shama and bought the house of Haja Fatima. He gave the old widow 1/4 and handed the other 3/4 to her husband's brother and sister. As soon as he married Shama, the deceiver reneged on his promise and asked Haja Fatima to go out of his newly purchased property. He said he decided to convert his 2 houses into one big mansion and live like a king with his 4 harems and 21 children. Sadly, the Canadian girl Natasha is also asked to go from where she had come. Luckily, Haja Fatima has a married brother who invited her to come and live with his wife and daughters. The great loser in this evil deal turned out to be the newly married widow Shama Yasser Sef Aldallah. Summary. The polygamist husband deceives Haja Fatima by making false promises about her security and the house, manipulating the inheritance process to her disadvantage, and ultimately forcing her out after using her trust to gain property and marry Shama. This betrayal leaves both women vulnerable and highlights the exploitation and lack of protection for women in the novel's patriarchal society. Here's a summary of the consequences of the polygamist husband's deception for both Shama and Natasha. Consequences for Shama. Loss of security. Shama marries the polygamist husband believing she and Haja Fatima will gain stability and a home. However, after the house is sold, she discovers the husband manipulated the inheritance process, leaving Haja Fatima with only 1/4 of the house's value and forcing both women to leave. Violence and isolation. After the marriage is revealed, Shama is violently attacked by the 3 rival wives, her former friends, leaving her hospitalized. She becomes an unwanted rival wife, isolated and forced to live in a hostile environment where her friendships are destroyed. Social and emotional harm. Shama's trust is betrayed not only by her husband, but also by the collapse of her support network. She faces emotional trauma, social exclusion, and the loss of both her home and her sense of belonging. Site turns 7fetch_file. Consequences for Natasha. Loss of shelter. Natasha, who is staying with Haja Fatima and Shama, is also forced to leave when the polygamist husband reneges on his promise and takes over the house. She must move with Haja Fatima to another relative's home, where she again faces suspicion and rejection. Continued instability. The deception perpetuates Natasha's cycle of displacement and vulnerability. She loses the temporary stability she had found and is once again subjected to the stigma and precariousness of her social position. Emotional impact. Natasha witnesses the betrayal and suffering of those she cares about, reinforcing her sense of injustice and the dangers women face in a patriarchal society. In summary, The polygamist husband's deception leads to severe consequences for both Shama and Natasha: loss of home and security, social isolation, emotional trauma, and renewed instability. Both women are left more vulnerable and marginalized as a result of his actions. Legal inheritance issues play a significant role in the plot, especially in the context of Sharia, Islamic law, and its impact on women's security and rights. Here's a summary of the key legal inheritance issues as depicted in the novel. 1. Sharia inheritance law and the house sale. Haja Fatima's house is still legally under the name of her late husband. According to Sharia law, when a man dies, his property must be divided among his heirs, which include not only his wife, but also his siblings, brother and sister. When the polygamist husband offers to buy Haja Fatima's house as part of the arrangement to marry Shama, he knows that, legally, Haja Fatima is only entitled to a quarter of the house's value. The remaining 3/4 must go to her late husband's brother and sister. Haja Fatima is unaware of this legal technicality and is deceived by the polygamist husband, who orchestrates the sale so that she receives much less than she expected. After the sale, she is forced to leave the house, losing both her home and her financial security. 2. Manipulation and exploitation. The polygamist husband exploits Haja Fatima's lack of legal knowledge and the complexities of Sharia inheritance law to his advantage. He uses the law to justify giving her only a fraction of the house's value and then reneges on his promise to let her stay in the house. This manipulation leaves Haja Fatima and Shama vulnerable and dependent on the goodwill of other relatives. 3. Broader implications for women. The novel highlights how Sharia inheritance law often disadvantages women, especially widows, by prioritizing male relatives in the distribution of property. Women like Haja Fatima, who may not be fully aware of their legal rights or the intricacies of inheritance law, are at risk of being dispossessed and left without security. 4. Later inheritance disputes. The novel also describes further inheritance disputes involving other family members, such as claims to property left by deceased relatives in Canada. These disputes are complicated by polygamy, questions of legitimacy, and conflicting legal systems, Sharia versus Canadian law, often resulting in women being excluded or marginalized in the final distribution of assets. In summary, legal inheritance issues in the novel revolve around the application of Sharia law, which often leaves women with limited rights to property and vulnerable to exploitation. The polygamist husband's manipulation of these laws results in Haja Fatima and Shama losing their home and security, illustrating the broader challenges women face in patriarchal legal systems. Certainly. Here's a summary of the differences between Sharia, Islamic, inheritance law, and Canadian inheritance law, drawing from both the novel Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society and legal sources. Manzil. +2. Sharia, Islamic, inheritance law. Fixed shares. Sharia law prescribes fixed shares for specific heirs, e.g., spouse, children, parents. The Quran and Sunnah dictate who inherits and how much, with little room for personal discretion. Gender disparity. Male heirs typically receive twice the share of female heirs of the same class, e.g., a son gets twice as much as a daughter. Limited testamentary freedom. Only up to 1/3 of the estate can be distributed by personal will, waziyah. The remaining 2/3 must go to the Fara'id fixed shares for Quranic heirs. Mandatory heirs. Certain relatives, spouse, children, parents, cannot be disinherited. No exclusion based on will. The testator cannot exclude eligible heirs from their Quranic shares, regardless of personal wishes. Agnatic preference. In Sunni law, inheritance often favors male relatives connected through the male line, agnates, though some female relatives do inherit fixed shares. Religious foundation. Inheritance is seen as a religious obligation, and deviation from these rules is not permitted for Muslims. Canadian inheritance law. Testamentary freedom. Individuals have broad freedom to distribute their estate as they wish through a will, including leaving assets to anyone or any cause, or disinheriting family members, with some exceptions for dependents. No gender bias. There is no legal requirement to favor male heirs over female heirs. All children and spouses can be treated equally. No fixed shares. There are no mandatory shares for specific heirs unless the deceased dies intestate, without a will, in which case provincial laws, like Ontario's Succession Law Reform Act, set out a default distribution, but still without gender bias. Charitable giving. Testators can leave any portion of their estate to charity or non-family members. Dependents' rights. While it can generally exclude anyone, dependents, such as minor children or spouses, may have a right to claim support from the estate if not adequately provided for. Secular foundation. Inheritance law is not based on religious principles, but on civil law and individual rights. Key differences. Aspect Sharia, Islamic law, Canadian law. Distribution fixed shares for Quranic heirs testator decides, except intestacy/default. Gender males generally inherit more than females, no gender preference. Testamentary freedom limited, max 1/3 by will rest fixed, broad, can leave estate as desired. Mandatory heirs yes, cannot disinherit Quranic heirs, no, except for dependents' support rights. Religious basis yes, Quran, Sunnah, Fara'id no, secular, civil law. Charitable giving max 1/3 of estate unlimited. In summary, Sharia inheritance law is highly structured, religiously mandated, and limits personal discretion, especially favoring male heirs and fixed shares. Canadian inheritance law is secular, flexible, and allows individuals to distribute their estate as they wish, with no gender bias and only limited restrictions to protect dependents. Mansell. +2. If you'd like, I can provide examples from the novel or further details on how these differences affect the characters' experiences. Inheritance issues, especially those rooted in Sharia law and cross-cultural legal conflicts, have a profound and recurring impact on Natasha's life. Here's a summary of how these issues affect her. 1. Instability and loss of security. Natasha's shelter and sense of stability are repeatedly threatened by inheritance disputes. For example, when Haja Fatima's house is sold after Shama's marriage, Sharia inheritance law dictates that most of the proceeds go to male relatives of the deceased, leaving Haja Fatima, and by extension, Natasha, who is living with her, with only a small share. As a result, Natasha is forced to move again, losing her temporary home and security site. 2. Exposure to exploitation. The manipulation of inheritance laws by male relatives or opportunistic figures, like the polygamist husband, exposes Natasha and the women around her to exploitation. Because women often lack legal knowledge or power, they are vulnerable to being dispossessed or deceived, as happens when Haja Fatima is forced out of her home and Natasha must follow. 3. Perpetuation of marginalization. Sharia inheritance law, which prioritizes male heirs and limits women's shares, reinforces Natasha's marginalization. As someone already stigmatized due to her illegitimacy, Natasha finds herself with even fewer resources and less protection when inheritance disputes arise. 4. Emotional and social consequences. The repeated loss of home and security due to inheritance issues adds to Natasha's emotional burden and sense of displacement. Each time she is forced to move or loses a support network, her vulnerability and isolation increase. 5. Legal and cultural conflict. Later in the novel, inheritance disputes become even more complex when they involve property and relatives in Canada. Natasha witnesses and is affected by the clash between Sharia law, with its fixed shares and gender bias, and Canadian law, which is secular and more egalitarian. These conflicts highlight the difficulties faced by women navigating multiple legal systems, often to their disadvantage. In summary, inheritance issues in the novel repeatedly destabilize Natasha's life, deprive her of security, and reinforce her vulnerability. The intersection of patriarchal legal systems and cultural expectations ensures that Natasha, and women like her, are left with little protection or recourse, deepening her struggle for dignity and autonomy. Natasha faces a range of problems with her new relatives and their neighbors, both males and females, after moving in with them. Here's a summary of the challenges she encounters. Problems with new relatives. Suspicion and rejection. Natasha's new relatives, especially the male head of the household, are suspicious of her background. When they discover she is an illegitimate child, her uncle becomes furious and demands she leave the house immediately. His wife is equally shocked and fears Natasha's presence will contaminate her own daughters. Stigma and shame. Natasha is viewed as a source of shame and disgrace. The family worries that her presence will bring dishonor and negative attention, especially to their unmarried daughters. Conditional support. Only Haja Fatima defends Natasha, threatening self-harm if Natasha is forced to leave. However, this support is fragile and does not resolve the underlying hostility or suspicion from the rest of the family. Pressure to prove identity. Natasha is asked to prove her blood relationship to the family, and even after doing so, she is not fully accepted. Problems with female neighbors. Gossip and curiosity. News of Natasha's background spreads rapidly among the women in the neighborhood. Female neighbors come to the house out of curiosity, treating Natasha as a spectacle or alien, not as a person. Mockery and ridicule. Some women come not just to see her, but to mock or judge her situation, seeing her as a living embodiment of shame and disgrace. Social exclusion. Despite her beauty, Natasha is considered unmarriageable. No family would allow their son to marry a bastard daughter, regardless of her qualities. She is excluded from normal social interactions and completely ostracized from the possibility of marriage or acceptance in the community. Problems with male neighbors. Objectification and lust. Young men in the area become obsessed with Natasha's beauty, but only as an object of lust, not as a potential wife. They gather outside the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but none would consider marrying her due to the stigma attached to her birth. Dehumanization. Natasha is treated as subhuman, outcast, untouchable, and her presence is believed to bring shame or contaminate others. Lack of respect or protection. Male neighbors do not offer her respect or protection. Instead, their attitudes reinforce her outsider status and vulnerability. Summary table. Group attitude/behavior toward Natasha. Consequence for Natasha. Male relatives suspicion, anger, rejection, demand for expulsion, loss of shelter, instability. Female relatives fear, shame, pressure to leave, emotional distress, lack of support. Female neighbors gossip, curiosity, mockery, exclusion, social isolation, ridicule. Male neighbors objectification, lust, dehumanization, vulnerability, lack of respect. In summary, Natasha faces suspicion, rejection, and stigma from her new relatives, is gossiped about and mocked by female neighbors, and is objectified and dehumanized by male neighbors. These combined attitudes leave her isolated, vulnerable, and excluded from normal social life, reinforcing her outsider status and deepening her struggle for dignity and acceptance. The secret videotaping of Natasha while she is taking a bath has a devastating impact on her life, among her neighbors, and within the community. Here's how the incident affects her. 1. Violation of privacy and dignity. Natasha is secretly filmed by local boys while she is bathing, completely unaware that her privacy is being invaded. The boys use cell phones to record her naked, and the video is later shared widely. 2. Public humiliation and objectification. The video is uploaded to the internet under a sensational title and quickly goes viral, being viewed by millions. Natasha becomes the subject of intense gossip and voyeuristic curiosity, not just locally but internationally. Among her neighbors, especially the young men, Natasha is no longer seen as a person, but as an object of sexual fantasy and ridicule. The incident amplifies her status as an outsider and spectacle. 3. Intensified social ostracism. The female neighbors, who already viewed Natasha with suspicion and as a source of shame, now see her as a living scandal. The incident confirms their worst fears about her being a bad influence or contaminated. Natasha is further isolated, with families becoming even more determined to keep their daughters away from her, fearing she will bring disgrace or contaminate their own children. 4. Loss of reputation and marriage prospects. Any remaining hope Natasha might have had for social acceptance or marriage is destroyed. She is now not only stigmatized as an illegitimate child, but also as someone whose nakedness has been exposed to the world, even though she is the victim. Young men in the neighborhood, who previously gathered just to catch a glimpse of her, now see her as a sexual object and a source of entertainment, not as a potential wife or equal. 5. Deepened emotional trauma. The betrayal and violation leave Natasha emotionally devastated. She is left with a sense of powerlessness, shame, and humiliation, knowing that her most private moments have been stolen and broadcast without her consent. In summary, the secret videotaping incident compounds Natasha's social exclusion, turning her into a target of gossip, ridicule, and objectification. It destroys any chance of acceptance in the community, intensifies her isolation, and inflicts deep emotional wounds, all while reinforcing the community's prejudices and cruelty toward her sight. The community's reaction to the secret videotaping of Natasha while she is taking a bath is overwhelmingly negative and deeply damaging to her social standing and emotional well-being. Here's a summary of the community's response. 1. Intensified gossip and curiosity. The incident becomes the talk of the neighborhood. News of the video spreads rapidly, and Natasha becomes the subject of intense gossip among both men and women. Female neighbors, who were already suspicious and judgmental, now see Natasha as a living scandal and a source of shame. They come to see her not out of sympathy, but out of curiosity and to confirm the rumors for themselves. 2. Objectification and sexualization. Young men in the area, who previously objectified Natasha from a distance, now view her as a sexual object after seeing the video. Their obsession with her increases, but it is entirely voyeuristic and disrespectful. Natasha is no longer seen as a person, but as an object of sexual fantasy and ridicule. 3. Heightened ostracism and stigma. The incident confirms and amplifies the community's worst prejudices about Natasha. She is blamed for the scandal, even though she is the victim of a gross violation of privacy. Families become even more determined to keep their daughters away from her, fearing she will bring disgrace or contaminate their own children. Natasha's already precarious social position collapses further. She is now completely ostracized and excluded from any possibility of acceptance or marriage. 4. Emotional and psychological impact. Natasha suffers deep humiliation, shame, and emotional trauma. She is left feeling powerless, violated, and isolated, knowing that her most private moments have been stolen and broadcast without her consent. In summary, the community's reaction to the videotaping incident is one of intensified gossip, objectification, and social exclusion. Rather than supporting Natasha as a victim, neighbors use the incident to further stigmatize, blame, and isolate her, compounding her suffering and reinforcing her outsider status. After the secret videotaping of Natasha while she is taking a bath, the behavior of her female neighbors becomes even more negative and damaging. 1. Intensified gossip and voyeurism. The female neighbors, who were already prone to gossip and curiosity about Natasha's background, become even more obsessed with her after the video incident. They spread the news rapidly, ensuring that everyone in the neighborhood knows about the scandal. Many women come to the house specifically to see Natasha, treating her as a spectacle or an alien, not as a person. Their visits are motivated by curiosity and a desire to witness the subject of the scandal firsthand. 2. Mockery, judgment, and social policing. Instead of showing sympathy for Natasha as a victim of a gross violation of privacy, the female neighbors mock and judge her. They see her as a living embodiment of shame and disgrace, reinforcing the stigma she already faces as an illegitimate child. Some women use the incident as justification to further ostracize Natasha, warning their own daughters to stay away from her and treating her as a cautionary example of what happens to bad girls. 3. Increased social exclusion. Natasha's already precarious social position collapses further. The female neighbors become even more determined to exclude her from social life, fearing that her presence will contaminate their own families or bring further disgrace. She is completely ostracized from any possibility of acceptance, friendship, or marriage within the community. 4. Lack of empathy and victim blaming. Rather than recognizing Natasha as a victim of a serious crime, the female neighbors blame her for the scandal. Their attitudes reflect a broader culture of shame and victim blaming, where the woman is held responsible for violations committed against her. In summary, after the videotaping incident, Natasha's female neighbors become more judgmental, gossipy, and exclusionary. They treat her as a spectacle, mock and blame her, and use the incident to reinforce her isolation and stigma, rather than offering support or empathy. The male neighbor's response to the secret videotaping of Natasha while she is taking a bath is characterized by objectification, voyeurism, and intensified disrespect. 1. Voyeuristic obsession. The incident begins with local boys secretly filming Natasha while she is bathing, motivated by curiosity and sexual interest. They go to great lengths to spy on her, using cell phones to record her naked without her knowledge. 2. Spreading and consuming the video. After recording, the boys share the video among themselves and upload it to the internet, where it quickly goes viral. The act of spreading the video is not just about sharing information, but about turning Natasha into a spectacle for male entertainment. 3. Objectification and sexualization. Natasha becomes the subject of sexual fantasy and ridicule among the young men in the neighborhood. They no longer see her as a person, but as an object for their amusement and desire. The video fuels their obsession, and Natasha is discussed and viewed in terms of her body and sexuality, not as a human being deserving of respect or privacy. 4. Intensified disrespect and exclusion. The male neighbor's behavior reinforces Natasha's outsider status. While they are fascinated by her, it is entirely voyeuristic and disrespectful. None would consider her as a potential wife or equal. Their actions contribute to her further social isolation and humiliation, as she is now not only stigmatized as an illegitimate child, but also as the unwilling star of a scandalous video. In summary, the male neighbors respond to the videotaping incident by objectifying Natasha, spreading the video for entertainment, and intensifying her social exclusion. Their actions are driven by voyeurism and disrespect, compounding Natasha's humiliation and reinforcing her vulnerability and outsider status in the community. In the novel Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed, Natasha's relatives and neighbors react with intense shock, rejection, and stigma when they discover she is a bastard daughter born out of wedlock. Here's a summary of their reactions based on the text. Immediate family reaction. Her uncle, the brother of Haja Fatima, is furious when he realizes Natasha is the illegitimate child from a long-buried family scandal. He confronts her, accuses her of being a source of shame, and demands she leave his house immediately. His wife is equally shocked and frightened, viewing Natasha as an outcast and a source of contagious shame. She fears Natasha's presence will corrupt her own daughters and is eager for her to be expelled from the house. Haja Fatima, her great-grandfather's cousin, defends Natasha, arguing that she is not responsible for her mother's actions and threatening self-harm if Natasha is forced to leave. This intervention allows Natasha to stay, but only over the strong objections of the others. Neighbors and community. The news spreads rapidly through the neighborhood. Women come to see Natasha out of curiosity, treating her like an alien or a spectacle, not as a person. Despite her beauty, they consider her unmarriageable. No family would allow their son to marry a bastard daughter, no matter her qualities. Young men in the area become obsessed with seeing her, but only as an object of lust, not as a potential wife. They gather outside the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but none would consider marrying her due to the stigma. Natasha is treated as a subhuman, untouchable, and a living embodiment of shame. The community's reaction is not just social exclusion but active dehumanization and objectification. Key quotes from the novel. She is considered as a subhuman, outcast, untouchable, and spreading stinking shame which emits from a child born out of adultery. No family in the whole universe would agree for their son marry a bastard daughter even if she is the only girl in the universe. To them she is like an alien girl who has descended from another planet from among the billions of stars of the Milky Way. Summary. Natasha's status as an illegitimate child leads to immediate rejection and attempts to expel her from the family home, widespread gossip and social ostracism, curiosity mixed with fear and contempt from neighbors, complete exclusion from the possibility of marriage or normal social acceptance. Despite a few individuals defending her, the overwhelming reaction is one of stigma, shame, and dehumanization, reflecting the deep-rooted cultural and religious taboos around illegitimacy in the society depicted in the novel. Neighbors' behaviors toward Natasha. Gossip and rapid spread of news. The wife of Natasha's uncle immediately spreads the news to all the neighbors. Each woman tells several others, causing the information to circulate quickly throughout the neighborhood. Curiosity and voyeurism. Neighbors, especially women, come to the house specifically to see Natasha with their own eyes. They treat her like a spectacle or an alien, not as a person, wanting to see what a bastard daughter looks like as an adult. Humanization and objectification. Natasha is viewed as an outcast, untouchable, and a source of contagious shame. She is treated as if she is contaminated and could transmit her sin to others, especially to the daughters of the household. Social ostracism. Despite her beauty, no family would consider her as a potential bride for their sons. She is considered unmarriageable, regardless of her qualities. Men. Young men in the neighborhood become obsessed with seeing Natasha, but only as an object of sexual desire, not as a potential wife. They gather outside the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but none would consider marrying her due to the stigma. Isolation and exclusion. Natasha is excluded from normal social interactions and treated as a subhuman or an alien. She is not welcomed or accepted into the community, and her presence is seen as a threat to the social and moral order. Mockery and ridicule. Some neighbors, especially women, come out of curiosity and to mock or judge her situation. They see her as a living embodiment of shame and disgrace. Natasha's neighbors respond with a mix of gossip, curiosity, dehumanization, exclusion, and objectification. She is treated as a spectacle, a source of shame, and is completely ostracized from the possibility of normal social life or marriage. The reaction is not just passive avoidance, but active social punishment and stigmatization. Natasha helps the 3 daughters of her relatives in Sudan primarily through education, emotional support, and open conversation about sensitive topics. 1. Educational support. Natasha becomes close to the 4 daughters, sometimes referred to as 3, depending on the context, of her Sudanese relatives. She helps them with their studies, especially in mathematics and English, which improves their academic performance and builds their confidence. Her willingness to tutor and mentor them makes her an important and valued presence in their household. She began to help them in their studies, especially all 4 girls are facing difficulties in mathematics and the English language. Besides her friendly and pleasant nature, the highly educated Canadian girl Natasha started to help the 4 daughters in their studies, and that has made their mother and father to change their attitudes towards the Canadian girl too. Therefore, Natasha is no longer an unwanted guest, but an important and helpful visitor. 2. Emotional support and friendship. Natasha develops a close friendship with the girls, creating a safe space for them to share their feelings, dreams, and struggles. She listens to their stories about love, relationships, and the challenges they face as young women in a conservative society. In a short time, Natasha developed good friendships with all 4 sisters. She began to help them in their studies. The highly educated Canadian girl Natasha started to help the 4 daughters in their studies, and that has made their mother and father to change their attitudes towards the Canadian girl too. 3. Open dialogue about taboo topics. Natasha encourages the girls to talk openly about topics that are often considered taboo, such as love before marriage, sexuality, and the dangers of honor-based violence. She asks them questions about what would happen if a girl fell in love or became pregnant before marriage, prompting honest and sometimes shocking responses that reveal the depth of fear and control in their lives. Although she anticipated their reactions and answers, still the Canadian girl asked the four sisters to tell her what would happen to a girl if she slept with her boyfriend before marriage and got impregnated by him out of adultery. The sisters are astonished by the question of Natasha. Then all four sisters instantaneously gave their answers as if each one were reading her answer from a paper in front of her eyes. Challenging harmful beliefs. Natasha tries to challenge the girls' beliefs about female genital mutilation, FGM, marriage customs, and the role of women, even though she faces resistance. She shares her own perspective and tries to dispel myths, especially about FGM and the supposed necessity of circumcision for girls. At the end of that interesting private discussion, the big sister asked Natasha whether she got circumcised when she was a small girl. The Canadian girl said she had not been circumcised, and she said to the four girls that female genital mutilation is harmful to the girl and would not benefit her in any way. The four sisters are not surprised to hear her answer because they were told by some of their girlfriends in school that in Europe and America the Muslim parents will go to jail if they circumcise their daughters. However, they said the girl cannot control her sexual desire if she has not been circumcised when she was a child. No matter how much the uncircumcised Canadian girl has tried to convince them what they were told by their mothers is wrong, she couldn't succeed. 5. Modeling independence and critical thinking. By sharing her own experiences and values, Natasha becomes a role model for the girls, showing them that it is possible to question traditions and imagine a different future. In summary, Natasha helps the daughters of her relatives by being a mentor, tutor, confidant, and advocate for critical thinking and women's rights. She provides both practical academic help and emotional support, while also gently challenging the restrictive norms that shape their lives. Here's a summary of the clandestine discussions between Natasha and the 3 or 4 sisters from her relative's family in Sudan, based on the novel Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed. Summary of the clandestine discussions. 1. Safe space for honest conversation. Natasha creates a private, trusting environment where the sisters feel comfortable discussing topics that are usually taboo in their society, such as love, sexuality, and personal dreams. These conversations are held away from the ears of parents and the broader community, allowing the girls to express themselves more freely. 2. Love, relationships, and marriage. The sisters confide in Natasha about their secret romantic feelings and relationships with boys, which are strictly forbidden in their culture. They share how they communicate with their boyfriends through letters and brief encounters, always under the threat of severe punishment if discovered. Natasha is surprised by their daring, but also saddened by the limitations and dangers they face. 3. Fear of honor-based violence. Natasha asks the sisters what would happen if a girl were to have sex before marriage or become pregnant out of wedlock. The sisters respond with chilling honesty, describing the violent consequences: honor killings by fathers, brothers, or mothers, or being burned alive. These answers reveal the deep-rooted fear and control that governs their lives. 4. Sexuality and bodily autonomy. The sisters and Natasha discuss topics like masturbation and female genital mutilation, FGM. The girls express the belief, taught by their mothers and reinforced by society, that uncircumcised girls cannot control their sexual desires and that masturbation is dangerous because it could break the hymen, leading to accusations of lost virginity and potential violence. Natasha tries to challenge these beliefs, explaining that FGM is harmful and not necessary, but she finds it difficult to change their minds. 5. The reality of marriage customs. The sisters reveal that, despite having boyfriends, they expect to be married off to cousins or men chosen by their fathers, not to the boys they love. They accept this as inevitable, saying, "My lover cannot be my husband." Natasha is struck by the resignation and lack of agency the girls feel regarding their futures. 6. Gender roles and societal expectations. Natasha and the sisters discuss the strict gender roles imposed on women, including dress codes, restrictions on movement, and the expectation of submission to male authority. The girls share their frustrations, but also their sense of powerlessness to change these norms. 7. Natasha as a role model and confidant. Through these discussions, Natasha becomes a mentor and confidant, encouraging the girls to think critically and question harmful traditions, even if they are not yet ready to openly resist them. She provides emotional support and a glimpse of alternative ways of thinking and living. In essence, the clandestine discussions between Natasha and the sisters are a mix of confession, curiosity, fear, and hope. They expose the harsh realities of growing up female in a patriarchal society, the longing for love and freedom, and the heavy weight of tradition and shame. Natasha's presence gives the girls a rare opportunity to voice their true feelings and consider new perspectives, even as they remain constrained by their environment. Natasha and her illegitimate child. 5. Natasha is introduced to the school in Sudan through her connection with the 4 daughters of her Sudanese relatives. Here's how the process unfolds. Building relationships with the family. After Natasha moves in with her relatives in Sudan, she becomes close to their 4 daughters. She helps them with their studies, especially in mathematics and English, which improves their academic performance and builds trust and friendship. Gaining a positive reputation, Natasha's willingness to tutor and mentor the girls makes her an important and valued presence in the household. Her educational background and friendly nature change the attitudes of the girls' parents, who begin to see her as an asset rather than an unwanted guest. Introduction to the school. Through her growing friendship with the 4 sisters, Natasha is introduced to the headmistress of a prestigious girls' school in the city. The headmistress hears about the highly educated Canadian girl from the sisters and invites Natasha to assist at the school. Role at the school. Natasha is asked to help the higher classes with English language and mathematics. She accepts the invitation, seeing it as an opportunity to interact with a larger group of Muslim girls and to learn more about the lives of women in Sudanese society. Integration and impact. Natasha quickly becomes popular among the students because she refuses to use corporal punishment, unlike other teachers. Many girls visit her office to share their problems, and she becomes both a teacher and a counselor, gaining insight into the challenges faced by young women in Sudan. Summary. Natasha's introduction to the school is facilitated by her supportive role within her relatives' family, her academic assistance to the daughters, and the positive word of mouth that leads the headmistress to invite her to teach. Her presence at the school allows her to further her research and advocacy for women's rights in Sudanese society. 1. Creating a safe space and building trust. Natasha quickly becomes a beloved figure among the students because she refuses to use corporal punishment, unlike the other teachers. Her gentle, supportive approach makes students feel safe to share their problems and seek her advice. Many girls visit her office, confide in her, and see her as both a teacher and a counselor. This trust allows Natasha to gain deep insight into the challenges and traumas faced by young women in Sudanese society. 2. Encouraging critical thinking and questioning. Natasha introduces new ways of thinking by comparing her own educational experiences in Ethiopia and Canada with the strict, punitive methods used in Sudan. She encourages students to question the necessity of physical punishment and to consider alternative, more compassionate forms of discipline. She also gently prompts them to think critically about the religious and cultural teachings they receive, especially regarding gender roles and the status of women. 3. Empowering students to challenge injustice. Through her counseling and classroom discussions, Natasha inspires some students to question and even challenge the misogynistic teachings they are exposed to, such as the Quranic verses and hadiths that justify polygamy, wife-beating, and child marriage. Some girls begin to raise these questions with their religious teachers and even with their parents, which is a bold and risky act in their context. 4. Consequences and backlash. Natasha's influence is so profound that it leads to a wave of questioning and minor rebellion among the students. However, this also brings severe consequences. The school authorities and some parents interpret the girl's questions as blasphemy and rebellion against Islamic values. Several students are punished, forced to repent publicly, and subjected to physical punishment. One particularly bold student is expelled and later, tragically, killed by her own father in an honor killing. Natasha herself is arrested and accused of apostasy and instigating rebellion. 5. Lasting impact. Despite the backlash, Natasha's impact is lasting. She plants seeds of doubt and hope in the minds of her students, showing them that alternative ways of living and thinking are possible. She models empathy, resilience, and the courage to speak out against injustice. Even after her arrest, the changes she sparked continue to ripple through the school and the community. Summary table. Natasha's impact. Area of impact description. Emotional support provides a safe, nonviolent, and empathetic presence for students. Critical thinking encourages questioning of harmful traditions and religious justifications. Empowerment inspires students to challenge injustice and advocate for their rights. Social consequences triggers institutional backlash, but also sparks ongoing dialogue and resistance. Legacy leaves a lasting influence on students' perspectives and aspirations for change. In essence, Natasha's presence at the school is transformative. She empowers students to think for themselves, question oppressive norms, and imagine a different future, even at great personal risk. Her impact is both inspiring and tragic, highlighting the dangers and necessity of challenging deeply entrenched systems of gender oppression. Natasha is shocked when she reads what the school teaches the girls because the curriculum is deeply misogynistic and enforces strict, discriminatory gender roles. Here's a detailed analysis based on the text. 1. Misogynistic teachings and gender roles. Natasha discovers that the school's religious curriculum, based on the works of influential Islamic scholars like Al-Ghazali, teaches girls that their primary duty is to serve and obey their husbands. Women should stay at home, avoid being seen or heard by men, and not pursue education or work outside the home. Women are inherently inferior to men in intellect, religion, and social status. Men are permitted to have multiple wives, beat their wives and daughters for disobedience, and control all aspects of women's lives. Women's testimony is worth half that of a man, and their inheritance is also half. 2. Justification of female suffering. The curriculum justifies women's suffering as a divine punishment for Eve's disobedience in the Garden of Eden, listing menstruation, childbirth, and lack of autonomy as curses placed on women. It teaches that women are responsible for men's misfortunes and that their only path to heaven is through complete submission to their husbands. 3. Discrimination against non-Muslim girls. Natasha is also disturbed to see that Christian and Coptic Orthodox girls are excluded from religious classes and pressured to convert to Islam, further reinforcing a culture of exclusion and discrimination. 4. Psychological impact on students. Through her counseling, Natasha finds that these teachings have caused the girls to suffer from low self-esteem, internalized inferiority, and a belief that they have no rights, even over their own bodies. Girls are taught that they are property to be sold in marriage, slaves to their husbands, and destined for hell unless they are perfectly obedient. 5. Natasha's emotional response. Natasha is outraged and saddened by the realization that the school is not just failing to empower girls, but is actively indoctrinating them into accepting abuse, submission, and inequality as divinely ordained. She sees how these teachings perpetuate cycles of silence, shame, and gender-based violence. Direct evidence from the text. Natasha has become extremely outraged when she read those Islamic religious books which teach misogynistic teachings and discriminate against women. Every girl is taught from the Islamic authentic books that as a daughter she is property to her father, and for that reason, He has the right to sell her in marriage to any man he liked, as a wife. She is a slave to her husband, and because of that he could do to her whatever he wished, and after her death, Allah would cast her into hellfire because she was born as a woman. Through her counseling sessions and other contacts with those students, Natasha discovered that all the girls in that school are suffering from low self-esteem. They have been taught to believe that as females they have no rights on everything belonging to them, even their selves and bodies. Summary. Natasha is shocked because the school's teachings are not just outdated or conservative, they are actively harmful, promoting the subjugation of women as a religious duty and leaving girls with psychological scars and a sense of hopelessness. This realization fuels Natasha's determination to challenge and expose these injustices. Natasha counters the school's misogynistic curriculum through a combination of empathy, critical questioning, and modeling alternative values. Here's how she does it. 1. Modeling compassion and nonviolence. Natasha refuses to use corporal punishment, unlike the other teachers. Her gentle, supportive approach makes students feel safe and respected, which is a stark contrast to the harsh discipline they are used to. 2. Encouraging critical thinking. She shares her own educational experiences from Ethiopia and Canada, where physical punishment is not allowed, and discipline is achieved through dialogue and counseling. Natasha encourages students to question the necessity and morality of physical punishment and to consider alternative, more compassionate forms of discipline. 3. Challenging harmful beliefs. In counseling sessions and private conversations, Natasha gently prompts students to think critically about the religious and cultural teachings they receive, especially those that perpetuate gender inequality and violence. She asks probing questions about the fairness of polygamy, child marriage, and the subjugation of women, helping students see that these practices are not universal or inevitable. 4. Empowering students. Natasha inspires some students to raise their doubts and questions with religious teachers and even with their parents, empowering them to advocate for themselves and challenge injustice. She provides emotional support and validation, helping girls develop self-esteem and a sense of agency. 5. Providing a safe space. Her office becomes a refuge where girls can share their fears, dreams, and frustrations without fear of judgment or punishment. Natasha listens to their stories, offers advice, and helps them process their experiences, which is especially important in an environment where open discussion is discouraged. 6. Planting seeds of change. Even though Natasha's influence leads to backlash from the school and community, she plants seeds of doubt and hope in the minds of her students, showing them that alternative ways of living and thinking are possible. In summary, Natasha counters the curriculum's teachings by embodying empathy, encouraging critical thought, and empowering girls to question and resist oppressive norms. Her approach is both direct, through discussion and example, and indirect, by modeling a different way of being a woman and a teacher, and it has a profound, if sometimes dangerous, impact on her students. On the story of the expelled student and Natasha's conversations with her, as depicted in Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed. Background of the student. The student comes from a polygamous family, experiencing rivalry, abuse, and injustice at home. She is intelligent, observant, and increasingly troubled by the contradictions and suffering she sees in her own life and in the lives of women around her. Key conversations with Natasha. 1. Private counseling and encouragement. Natasha provides a safe space for the student to express her doubts about polygamy, gender roles, and religious justifications for women's suffering. Natasha listens empathetically and encourages her to think critically. Natasha began to encourage them to question their Islamic teachers about those misogynistic teachings that they learned about themselves. The truth of the matter is that the foreign teacher is incredibly careful while she is creating those doubts in the minds of her students. She always compared the beautiful values that had been instilled in her mind when she was a student in Ethiopia and Canada with the misogynistic teachings those girls are learning in their school. 2. Classroom challenge. During a religious class, the student, emboldened by Natasha's support, publicly questions the justice of polygamy. She told her teacher, in Sudan, if the husband has a wife and marries a second wife, the Sudanese Muslim society will call the second wife al-dara, which means the evildoer or the woman who brings evil to the first wife. Then she asked her teacher why Islam allows the husband to bring to his first wife another woman who is called by the Muslim society the evildoer. Then that bold student asked, is there any man in Sudan can sleep peacefully in his house if he knows his wife is in bed that night with another man? Of course, there is no husband in the whole world will tolerate that his wife can have sex with another man with his full knowledge and consent. If the man can't stomach polyandry, then why the wife must agree to share her husband with another woman? 3. Refusing to recant. When confronted by the headmistress and her mother, the student refuses to withdraw her statements or repent, even under threat of expulsion and social ostracism. Natasha's role and impact. Natasha's conversations with the student are marked by empathy, encouragement, and a willingness to discuss taboo subjects. She does not push the student to rebel, but she validates her feelings and questions, helping her see that her doubts are reasonable and shared by others. Natasha's support gives the student the courage to speak out, even though it leads to tragic consequences. Aftermath. The student is expelled and later killed by her father in an honor killing, a fate that deeply affects Natasha and the school community. Natasha's influence is recognized as both a catalyst for critical thought and a threat to the status quo, leading to her own arrest and persecution. In summary, Natasha's conversations with this particular student are a powerful example of how empathy, critical questioning, and moral support can empower young women to challenge oppressive systems, even when the risks are immense. The student's story illustrates both the potential and the peril of resistance in a deeply patriarchal society. 4 Sisters, a window into private rebellion. After Natasha moves in with her Sudanese relatives, she becomes close to their 4 daughters, sometimes referred to as 3 or 4 sisters, depending on the context. These girls are teenagers, attending school, and despite the strict social environment, are curious, intelligent, and quietly rebellious. 1. Private conversations about love and marriage. Natasha creates a safe, private space for the sisters to talk about taboo topics like love, relationships, and sexuality. The girls confide in Natasha about their secret boyfriends, how they communicate through letters, and the risks they take to experience romance in a society where such behavior is forbidden. In a short time, Natasha developed good friendships with all 4 sisters. She began to help them in their studies. The highly educated Canadian girl Natasha started to help the 4 daughters in their studies, and that has made their mother and father to change their attitudes towards the Canadian girl too. 2. Challenging honor-based violence. Natasha asks the sisters what would happen if a girl were to have sex before marriage or become pregnant out of wedlock. The sisters respond with chilling honesty, describing the violent consequences: honor killings by fathers, brothers, or mothers, or being burned alive. Natasha listens, shocked but empathetic, and gently challenges the normalization of such violence. Although she anticipated their reactions and answers, still the Canadian girl asked the 4 sisters to tell her what would happen to a girl if she slept with her boyfriend before marriage and got impregnated by him out of adultery. The sisters are astonished by the question of Natasha. Then all 4 sisters instantaneously gave their answers as if each one were reading her answer from a paper in front of her eyes. Natasha. 3. Discussing female genital mutilation (FGM). Natasha openly discusses FGM with the sisters, explaining that it is harmful and not beneficial. The girls, however, repeat what they have been taught by their mothers and society, that uncircumcised girls cannot control their sexual desires. Natasha tries to dispel these myths, but finds it difficult to change their minds. At the end of that interesting private discussion, the big sister asked Natasha whether she got circumcised when she was a small girl. The Canadian girl said she had not been circumcised, and she said to the 4 girls that female genital mutilation is harmful to the girl and would not benefit her in any way. The 4 sisters are not surprised to hear her answer because they were told by some of their girlfriends in school that in Europe and America the Muslim parents will go to jail if they circumcise their daughters. However, they said the girl cannot control her sexual desire if she has not been circumcised when she was a child. No matter how much the uncircumcised Canadian girl has tried to convince them what they were told by their mothers is wrong, she couldn't succeed. Natasha. 4. Modeling independence and critical thinking. By sharing her own experiences and values, Natasha becomes a role model for the sisters. She encourages them to think critically, question harmful traditions, and imagine a different future, even if they are not yet ready to openly resist. Impact and significance. Emotional support. Natasha's presence gives the sisters a rare opportunity to voice their true feelings and consider new perspectives. Challenging taboos. Through honest dialogue, Natasha helps the girls confront the realities of honor-based violence, FGM, and forced marriage. Planting seeds of change. While the sisters may not immediately reject the norms of their society, Natasha's influence helps them see that alternative ways of living and thinking are possible. In summary, Natasha's conversations with the four sisters are a powerful example of how private, empathetic dialogue can challenge deeply ingrained beliefs and offer hope for change, even in the most restrictive environments. Her impact is subtle but profound, as she helps the girls question, dream, and begin to imagine a life beyond the boundaries set by tradition and fear. The oldest sister. Love, duty, and resignation. Background. The oldest of the four sisters is a teenager, academically struggling, but bright and emotionally mature. Like her sisters, she lives under strict parental and societal expectations in Sudan, where girls are expected to be obedient, modest, and prepared for arranged marriage. Secret love and double life. Despite the restrictions, the oldest sister has a secret boyfriend. She communicates with him through letters and brief, risky encounters, always fearing discovery. Natasha becomes her confidant, and the sister shares her dreams of love and her anxieties about the future. Natasha was surprised when she came to know that in a Muslim society the girl could have a love affair in that way, where she could not talk, greet, hug, kiss, or have any physical contact with her boyfriend, and still she called it to be love relation. The girls receive and send their romantic letters to their boyfriends through their lovers' sisters, who are their classmates or neighbors. Natasha and her illegitimate child. 6. Arranged engagement and resignation. Eventually, the oldest sister is engaged by her father to a male cousin, a match arranged without her input. She is not surprised or heartbroken. She has always known that her love for her boyfriend could never lead to marriage. Although the oldest daughter is engaged and her wedding date is fixed, she still continued her secret love affair with her boyfriend. Natasha asked her what she was going to do after her marriage. Would she continue that secret love affair and hence cheat on her husband, or break the friendship with her lover and break his heart too? The girl told Natasha that no girl in Sudan could continue her love affair after she got married. The foreign girl tried to find out why the girl should sacrifice her love after marriage. The girl did not give any convincing reason. She just said it is not the right thing for a girl to have a lover after having a husband. The other three sisters backed the words of their sister and said in unison, "My lover cannot be my husband." Conversations with Natasha. Natasha gently challenges the sisters' resignation, asking why she must give up her own desires and accept a future chosen for her. The sister, however, is deeply shaped by her upbringing and the fear of social consequences. She explains that, in her world, a girl's body and fate belong to her family and, later, her husband. Fear of honor-based violence. When Natasha asks the sisters what would happen if a girl were discovered to have had sex before marriage or became pregnant, the oldest sister responds with chilling clarity. Her father would open her pregnant stomach with his big knife and then kill her Wald al-Haram baby first, and after that, he would cut her neck, said the oldest sister. Internal conflict and coping. The oldest sister's story is one of quiet rebellion and deep internal conflict. She yearns for love and autonomy, but feels powerless to change her fate. Natasha's presence gives her a rare chance to voice her feelings and imagine alternatives, but the weight of tradition and fear keeps her from open resistance. Summary of her challenges. Secret love versus arranged marriage. She must hide her true feelings and accept a marriage she did not choose. Fear of violence and shame. The threat of honor-based violence shapes her choices and silences her desires. Resignation to fate. Despite her dreams, she feels she has no agency over her future. Longing for understanding. Natasha's empathy and questions offer comfort and a glimpse of hope, but cannot fully overcome the barriers she faces. In essence, the oldest sister story is a poignant example of how girls in patriarchal societies navigate love, duty, and fear. Natasha's conversations with her provide emotional support and plant seeds of critical thinking, but the sister's challenges remain immense and largely unresolved within the constraints of her environment.